Hey, and welcome back to another Revit video. In this video, we're looking at 3D extents. That's very exciting. The extents of 3D. Ooh, it's exciting. It is. It really is. But first, before we get into it, if at any point you happen to learn something or you just like the video, then please demolish that like button. It really helps me out a lot. Also, please consider changing the phase of that subscribe button to existing. That also helps me out so much. So let's get into it. We're talking about 3D extents. The first thing we'll do in this video is define what that is, what we're talking about when we actually say 3D extents. Then we're going to move into setting those extents because we want to not only define what they are, but put them in the way that we want them. You know, it's going to be building specific, but having the ability to move the extents to where they should be for views is the idea. And finally, we can see what that impact has on just some basic floor plan sections and make sure that we get the look that we're going for. So first, let's define 3D extents. What is 3D extents and what are we looking at? 3D extents is basically everything to do with datums. That's levels and grids. And you'll notice if you've worked in work-sharing projects, you've got a workset that is created by default called shared levels and grids that's created for you. All of those elements that you have are converted and placed into that workset for the reason of managing them specifically on their own. That is not covered in this video. We're not really worried about that, but the idea is what are we doing with those, and the idea of all of those together and how they work together and come together is what creates the 3D extents. So the 3D extents are those levels and grids and the extents that they cover in your model to create your 3D model. Now, the 3D extents that cover, that refer to levels and grids, they don't have anything to do with your model in that you can model everything normally. You can have everything modeled as you want it with the extents of, the 3D extents not actually covering the model. And you'll start to see why you don't want that to be the case, because a case like that would be if you have a floor plan and you have a giant floor plan and you have grids that cover like a quarter of it but not the rest of it. It wouldn't make any sense. Like, the idea is that the contractor's building off of these grids and these levels, and having these things set in stone is really going to be a key to the success of your model and your project. So the idea is that we lock these things down, get them in the right place, the correct place from really the beginning of the project as soon as you can, and then move on to actually making sure that they show up correctly in all your views. So what we're looking at here is just nothing special, basic template, but I've got a bunch of columns here. And the idea is that I don't have a full building, but I have a full building of columns. So these columns in a way represent the full building, because columns and all of that, the structure has to do with the levels and grids. And what we're working with, the fact is that we have all of our grids in place over these columns, and then the levels are associated as well, and that we can really start to begin to define the extents of everything that we need to when it comes to datums in Revit and in this project. So I actually have gone ahead and done the levels myself, because starting in 2020, they became very easy. We're able to do this in 3D. So I can simply select any of these levels, and you can see I've got my levels defined here, and they're just basic 10 feet apart. And you can easily push and pull these levels and define the extents. So what is this doing really? Well, this is just changing where this level is viewed and labeled in your project. So for example, if I were to move this level all the way over here and I have a section that cuts through this portion there, I wouldn't see the level tag for level 1 in this case. And that's just because I've moved the extents of that level out of that particular view. And so really what we're going for is that we have defined the full extents of the building with levels and grids, because that's what's used to build the building. Basically, you're starting from square one. The square one is that you have these grids in a particular place and defined to build every other element in the project. So we want to get those levels correctly placed. And so I have all of these levels placed, and it's covering the extents of this portion of the building. You can imagine that this is like an office, and then I've got a garage, which is why I've got two separate levels or two separate areas, two different structures, whatever. And you can see over here, I've got these garage levels, and these garage levels are specifically only covering the garage. So the idea is if I cut through just the office or this portion of the building, I wouldn't see a garage level because maybe it wouldn't matter. Now, it would matter, and I would see both levels if I were to make a section that cut all the way through. And in that case, I'd want to see them both. So it's really about defining all of these places and where they are in your project really as soon as you can. And the same applies to grids. So if I go to my level 1 plan, I have grids that cover everything. This is what you want. And this is probably what you're going to get by default when you just simply place the grids. And again, if I look at level 2, I see absolutely everything there. Now I'm going to make another floor plan level, and let's go ahead and make level 8, for example. So I'll go to View, Plan Views, Floor Plan, and let's go ahead and make level 8. And I'll hit OK. And there's level 8. Okay, that's great. Now, the first thing we're noticing is that I don't see any grids. And we might ask, why is that? Well, the default is that you don't necessarily have grids that are fully expanding throughout your building. Now, if that were the case and that were automatic, there would be no purpose for this video, and the 3D extents would take care of itself, basically. But this is not the case. It's something that's more manual, and for good reason, because we want to actually have control over this. So what I want to do is come into level 1, and I'm going to draw a couple of sections. I'll draw a section that's across my office and my garage, and then I'll go ahead and draw another one that is just through my garage looking back at my building. So I'll just push that all the way, and again I'll push this all the way as well. And let's look at this here. So if I go into this section, we can see there are my grids, and this starts to make a little more sense. So if I look at my level 8 here, and if I take my cut, which is 4 feet above level 8 by default, I don't have any grids there. They're all down here. The 3D extents of these grids and where they're showing up in 3D is only like just above level 2 and basically sitting on level G2. That is not helpful to us. This is not helpful to us because we can't see them, and we want to see them. We want to have control over these things in these levels. We want to see them to see where they are. We have to dimension to them and everything. So whenever you click a grid, you can see that I've got a lot going on here. I've got my head, I've got this little 3D there, I've got a bubble, and I've got the bubble here at the bottom again with a 3D, and I've got a check mark on either end. Now the check mark is just going to reveal that head or not. The head and the tail, the idea is that you have a head that on the top and the tail on the bottom. It kind of makes sense, but you could have it on both if you want. And this is going to work just the same for floor plans. It's grids, and this is how they operate. So if I were to push and pull this, I can move it all the way up. That's great, and we want to do that. So let's grab the little bubble there and move that past level 10. So we can clearly see that now all of our grids are pulled all the way up past level 10. So my guess is that if I go into level 8, I can start to see the grids. And there we go. Now, you'll also notice I only took care of one of them because I only took care of them in one section. So let's now go to this section and do the same thing. Again, I have the same problem, same thing here. So let's go ahead and pull these all the way up. And now my bet is if I go to level 8, I can see all of these grids. And sure enough, I do. I see all my grids here just like I do back on level 1. It looks exactly like I would expect. Level 1 looks like level 8. Okay, that's good. Now, while this does work and you're okay, stopping here, the fact of the matter is if we look a little more detailed, we can start to see, well, okay, we've got the garage here on the side, and that only goes up to like G4, which is like 35 feet. And that is absolutely not 90 feet above. So why in the world would I need a grid that's way up here? Well, I don't really. And so the idea is we can start to change what these would look like. And I want to actually change the extents of these grids, not only in this view, but throughout all other views. And so if we're looking at this now, I've got my 3D extents. And now maybe we want these 3D extents to not go all the way up because it doesn't make sense. We want the 3D extents to come down. Well, if I were to move it down again, I'd move all of them. And that's just because they're linked together. It makes sense. They want to play together. That's fine. But that's where this lock comes into play. I can simply unlock this and I can move this level down or move this grid down to just above G4 because that's where we would want it. And again, because it's 3D, this is affected in 3D. Okay. And now you can see I really want to do the same thing for grid 9 and 10. So I want to simply unlock this and move this down to match level 8. And you can see it will snap nicely to level 8. And I want to do the same thing for 10. I will go ahead and unlock this and move this down. And so this is starting to look good. Like it looks like an actual building section. You can start to understand what's going on. You can see the differences in the levels. And my grids aren't flying all the way up to the top of the building over the garage. It doesn't make sense to do that. That's great. So now we need to do the same thing for our other section. So let's go to our other section. And so this is a little more difficult because we've got the garage in front, but we've got the office behind. So how would we determine what this looks like? Well, let's go back into our level 1 floor plan. And you could do this with both section or elevation, but because I have a section made, I'll just use this. I'm going to pull my section all the way back here. And then I'm only going to make the extent of this section to be through the garage. So again, it's only going to be 8, 9, and 10. So now I'm essentially isolating the garage in elevation or section, however you want to look at this. And so we can clearly see now that this is not where we want these to be. It makes sense. And now the problem here, unfortunately, is that I cannot simply drag these down in 3D and bring them down to this point. Because you have to remember, this grid is not only in this view, because it's 3D, it's spanning the entire length. And there's no way around it. I can't simply tell a grid to stop at a certain point here and continue on up here. Like it doesn't work that way. It's just unfortunate. So how would we handle this type of situation? So we saw in the first section, this is very easy. I brought the 3D extents down, they're 3D, and I brought them down. Now, with this here, I am unfortunately not able to do this in 3D because, like I said before, if I bring this down, it's going to bring it down everywhere, and I don't want to do that. So this is where the view, it becomes view specific at this point. So if I'm just looking at the garage below, I'm going to go ahead and make this on medium so we can see our columns. I need to change this from 3D to 2D. So the second I change this from 3D to 2D, you can see that my lock option goes away and that large bubble is now just a small filled in circle. And I can, again, freely move this down however I want. But you'll also notice this did not affect anything in 3D because I can still see everything the way it was in 3D. Now, if I were to make an actual elevation, which would actually show this better, I'll make an elevation here so we can get an idea of what this looks like. So I'll go ahead and make my elevation. And so this elevation, it has all of these grids exactly where I left them in 3D. You could see that. There's A, it's all the way up here past level 10. Whereas if I come into this view, I could see, oh, it's brought down here. And that's because I've changed this to 2D and brought this down. You can even see where it is in 3D because of that actual bubble and the dashed line that continues. Now I can do the exact same thing for all of these different views, all these grids in this view. This can be kind of tedious, but this is really, unfortunately, kind of what we're stuck with because this is something that's pretty specific. And again, I can't just like cut where a grid is populating in 3D space. It's up to a point is the way it works. Now, there is something that I can do, and this is where something called Propagate Extents comes into play. Now, I'm going to get back to the elevation and go back to my floor plans here. So I've got my floor plan. Level 1, we can see everything here. We've got all of our columns there. We can see them. And when we go up to level 8, now this looks a bit funny because I am now over the garage and I am no longer seeing any columns here. In a sense, there's no content here. There's nothing I need to worry about, nothing I need to document. It's just not there. And so, I'm stuck with these grids flying all the way out here just because, they're here, in 3D. I don't have any other way of controlling this, because if I were to move these back, I would lose them in my section views. I would not see them the way that I need to see them in 3D. So this is where 2D comes into play. So just like before, I can change this from 3D to 2D and then move this all the way up to where, it makes more sense. It makes sense to stop the grid there. And you might say, well, we've done this before in section, and we have, but I wanted to show you the next step to this. So this is where Propagate Extents comes into play. So whenever you select a grid, if you're in a view that's not 3D, you can see this Propagate Extents button pop up. And this says copies the extents and appearance of datum elements to parallel views. So this is going to allow us to easily make this particular change that we made just in 2D to this grid on any other floor plan that we want, because it's parallel. So I'm going to go ahead and make a level 9 floor plan so we could see this. So here's level 9. And so the difference between level 8 and level 9 is that I've got that grid that's clearly in a different place. I can see level 8, there it is. I've manually pulled this back in 2D. And level 9, it's still just showing the full extents in 3D. Okay, that's great. Now, how can I easily make this change and make this grid line display exactly like this on level 9? That's where Propagate Extents comes in. I can simply click the grid, click Propagate Extents, and this is basically saying which of these parallel views would you like this particular datum to show up the same way. Well, I want that also on level 9. Great. Now, I have the other options of choosing 1 and 2. Now, I don't want to choose level 2 or 1 because I've got the garage here. I want this extending through the garage. So I'll choose level 9. I'll hit OK, and I can come over to level 9 and see my change. I can see that perfectly. Now, I'm going to go ahead and make this change for all of them, and you can see that it works just the same for any other view. And I can choose multiple grid lines at once and do this in any view. I can choose all 3 of these, Propagate Extents even from level 9 now. I can choose level 8, hit OK, come back to level 8, and I can see it's exactly matched and perfect. And this is not affecting 3D. This is only affecting 2D. So in a sense, if I come back to 3D, if we could see grids, they would fill the full extent everywhere, except over the garage where I'm able to pull them down because of the direction they're running. Okay, that makes sense. So the idea is that Propagate Extents is allowing us to manually change the location of all these grid heads wherever I want, grid heads or tails in that sense, wherever I want based on the view. It's all based on a particular floor plan view. And really the same works for Propagate Extents here. I could choose both of these and choose to propagate the extents here for that new elevation that I made. So I can come back to this new elevation. You can see that they're pulled down. So maybe this turns into an elevation just for the garage. And so I would pull this back to just show the garage. And if I come back to the garage, perfect. Look at that. So I've got this section that is essentially the same looking as this elevation because they're looking at the same thing, but I'm able to do the exact same thing as far as propagating the extents in an elevation section or in a floor plan. It's just working with these parallel views. And so this is really nice and really helpful for especially larger buildings if you have all these different floor plans that you need to do and you want to make them look consistent. I'm all for that, and it makes perfect sense to do that. So I'd highly recommend using the Propagate Extents because that's very, very important. Now, obviously, be careful where you use that because, like I said, we don't want to necessarily use that on levels that we want to see the overall floor plan. So if I take this grid and I propagate the extents on level 1, and I come back to level 1, well, now I'm missing that grid going through the garage, and I absolutely need that in an overall floor plan of level 1 that has the garage. So be cognizant of that and make sure that you're seeing your grids wherever you need to see them. And basically just you work on a couple of levels, a couple of sections and situations where they are, and then you can simply propagate the extents to other views that are similar or parallel and that need to show the same content. So I hope you learned something about 3D extents, what they are, what it is, how to use them, how to really get the idea of what 3D extents can do and why setting them is very important. If you did learn something, Please demolish that like button. Really helps me out so much. Also, please consider changing the phase of that subscribe button to existing. That also helps me out so much. And I thank you all who have. If you stuck around this long in the video, you've probably learned a lot, and I just can't thank you enough for doing that. I really appreciate it. I sure hope to see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for watching.